They didn't recognize me when they walked into the building. That part still makes me catch my breath when I think about it. How my mother straightened her blazer in the lobby mirror, smoothed her hair, and had absolutely no idea whose office she was about to walk into. I watched them from the hallway through the glass panel beside my assistant's desk. My father was carrying a leather portfolio, the expensive kind, like he was trying to look prepared. My mother had worn her good pearls. They looked nervous, the way people look when they need something badly and don't know yet how badly it's already too late. My assistant knocked on the open door behind me. "Dr. Calloway, your 9 o'clock is here." I straightened my coat and said, "Give me 2 minutes. I needed those 2 minutes. Not because I was afraid. I had stopped being afraid of them a long time ago. I needed them because I wanted to feel steady. Because the woman walking into that room was not the 18-year-old girl they had thrown out of their house in the middle of a February night with a garbage bag of clothes and $40 in her pocket. I needed 2 minutes to remember that. Then I walked in. I grew up in a small city in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone's business belongs to everyone else by Tuesday. My parents were the kind of people who cared enormously about what the neighbors thought. My father worked in insurance and coached my brother's little league team and shook every hand at every church picnic. My mother volunteered at the library and brought casseroles to sick neighbors and smiled at everyone with a warmth that I believed completely until I was 18 years old and stopped believing in almost everything. I was their only daughter. The older child, the one who was supposed to set an example. I made good grades. I didn't cause trouble. I had a plan. College, pre-med, become a doctor like my uncle who came to Thanksgiving every year and let me listen to his stethoscope when I was little. Then I met a boy, the way girls meet boys when they're 17 and the world feels infinite. His name doesn't matter now. He was a year older, played guitar, drove too fast, and told me I was different from other girls. I believed that too. I believed a lot of things back then. When I was 18, I found out I was pregnant. I remember the exact moment I told my parents. It was a Sunday evening, after dinner, the dishes still stacked in the sink. I sat across from them at the kitchen table, and I said the words, and I watched their faces change. Not with worry, not with love, not even with anger right away. First, what I saw was something closer to disgust, like I had contaminated something. My father looked at the table, my mother looked at her hands, then my father looked at her hands. Then my father looked at me and said, "You've ruined this family." I tried to explain. I tried to say that I was scared and that I needed them. I tried every word I had. My mother asked me, quietly, if the boy would marry me. I said I didn't know. I said I wasn't sure I wanted that. She closed her eyes like I had given the wrong answer to a question she'd already decided the outcome of. They gave me 3 days. 3 days to figure out what I was going to do, which meant 3 days to agree to do what they wanted, or I would need to find somewhere else to live. They said this calmly, like they were discussing what to have for dinner. I didn't find an alternative in 3 days. I didn't know how. So on the 4th morning, my father put a garbage bag of my things outside my bedroom door, and my mother handed me $40 in cash and the number for a women's shelter downtown, and they told me they loved me, but they couldn't support this decision. It was February. I was 18 years old and I was 10 weeks pregnant, and I stood on the front steps of the house I'd grown up in, and I did not cry, which surprises me even now when I think about it. I think some griefs are too large for tears right away. They come later, in smaller pieces, at strange times. In the car on the way home from work 15 years later, standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store, I walked to the bus stop with my garbage bag, and I called the only person I could think of. My aunt on my father's side, his older sister, had always been different from the rest of the family. She'd never married, never owned a home, lived in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building near the university where she'd taught high school chemistry for 31 years. She was 63 years old when I called her. She picked up on the 2nd ring. I told her everything standing at the bus stop. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "What bus are you on? I'll meet you downstairs." That was it. That was all she said. Her apartment had 1 bedroom, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a kitchen table wedged against the wall with two mismatched chairs. She gave me her bedroom and slept on the pull-out sofa without mentioning it once. She fed me. She came to my first prenatal appointment and took notes in her small, precise handwriting. She told me that whatever I decided to do, she would help me. She told me I was not ruined. She told me I was beginning. "Your parents are frightened people," she told me one evening. We were sitting at that small kitchen table, eating soup she'd made from scratch because she said canned soup was an insult to winter. Frightened people do tremendous damage and call it love. You don't have to forgive that, but you can't let it be the story you tell yourself about who you are. I wrote that down in a notebook that night. I still have it. My son was born in September. I named him Marcus after no one in particular, just a name I had loved since I read it in a book. He was small and loud, and he smelled like something I didn't have a word for. My aunt cried when she held him. I had never seen her cry before. 3 weeks after Marcus was born, I enrolled in community college. My aunt watched him on the mornings I had class. I worked at a coffee shop on the evenings she had her book club. We built something between us that I'm not sure has a name. Not mother and daughter exactly, not roommates, not friends in the ordinary sense. Something more specific than any of those. She was the person who believed I could do the thing before I believed it myself. I wanted to be a doctor. I had wanted that since I was a little girl with a stethoscope at Thanksgiving. My aunt never suggested I want something smaller. When I said it out loud one night, she just nodded and said, "Then that's what we're working toward." It took me longer than it takes most people. Community college, then transfer to a 4-year program, then working through the prerequisites, then the MCAT, then medical school. Marcus grew up doing homework at hospital cafeteria tables sometimes, eating vending machine crackers while I studied. He learned to be quiet and occupied in a way that still moves me when I think about it. He knew what we were building even when he was too young to say it. My aunt came to my medical school graduation. She wore a blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, and she cried again, which meant it was one of exactly 3 times I'd seen her cry in my adult life. The other time would come later. I matched into internal medicine. I did my residency in Cleveland. Brutal and exhausting, and the most important 3 years of my professional life. I cried in hospital bathrooms. I called my aunt at midnight when I couldn't decompress any other way. I made mistakes and learned from them and became, slowly, the kind of doctor I had imagined from the beginning. After residency, I joined a practice. After 3 years, I helped build a better one. The practice grew. We brought on more physicians. We expanded our services. I did not set out to become an executive. I set out to see patients, and I still did. But somewhere along the way, I also became the person making the decisions about how the organization ran. The person who hired and fired and set the direction. By the time I was 34, I was the chief medical officer of a regional healthcare group with 6 clinics across 3 counties. My office had a view of the city I had once walked through with a garbage bag. Marcus was 16, doing well in school, talking about studying environmental science. He was kind, the way children become kind when they've been shown what kindness looks like by the person raising them alone. My aunt had taught me, and I had tried to teach him. She got sick when he was 13, a diagnosis that started cautiously and then became less cautious over the following year. She was 76 years old, and she faced it the way she had faced everything, directly, without drama, with the same quiet precision she brought to every challenge in her life. She told me the prognosis. She asked good questions at every appointment. She made arrangements. In her last weeks, she held my hand one afternoon and said, "You did it. I need you to hear that from me. You did every bit of it." I told her she'd done it with me. She shook her head. "I handed you the materials. You built the house." She passed on a Tuesday morning in April, with Marcus and me beside her. She left me her apartment, her books, her chemistry teacher's pension that she'd saved carefully for decades, and a letter she'd written by hand that I keep in my desk at work to this day. I grieved her completely. I still grieve her. Some people you carry forever, not as a weight, but as a compass. I first heard from my parents through a letter, which arrived at my home address. I still don't know how they found it, about 8 months after my aunt passed. The letter was from an attorney. It stated that my father and mother were contesting certain elements of my aunt's estate, specifically the transfer of her financial assets and personal property to me, on the grounds that as her only surviving sibling, my father believed he had a rightful claim to a portion of what she left behind. The number they were contesting was not large by some standards. It was large by the standards of what my aunt had quietly saved over a lifetime of living carefully and wanting little. I sat with that letter for a long time. I had not spoken to my parents in 16 years. I had no way of knowing whether they had tried to reach me, whether they had thought about Marcus, whether they had any idea what my life had become. I had not reached out to them. After the first few years, the wound had not disappeared, but it had become familiar, a scar rather than an open cut. Now they were back, and they wanted something. I called my attorney that same evening. She was thorough and direct, which is why I trusted her. She told me the claim had limited legal merit but would need to be formally addressed. She filed the necessary responses. She told me to let her handle the communications and to stay out of direct contact until we understood more about what they actually knew and didn't know. What they didn't know, as it turned out, was everything. They had tracked down my home address through some combination of public records and whatever mutual acquaintances still existed from our old neighborhood. They knew I lived in the same city where I'd grown up. They knew because it was on my aunt's obituary that I was a physician. What they didn't know was the title on my office door. What they didn't know was the scope of what that meant. Their attorney contacted my attorney. My attorney reviewed the filing. There were references to the family connection, to my father's belief that his sister had been unduly influenced in her final years, to the suggestion that I had cultivated a relationship with an elderly woman for financial benefit. I want to describe what it felt like to read those words about the woman who had slept on a pull-out sofa for 3 months so I had a place to sleep. The woman who had come to every prenatal appointment. The woman who had helped me raise my son when I was doing it alone and learning as I went. The woman who had told me I was not ruined. I let myself feel it for one evening. Then, I got to work. My attorney requested a formal mediation session, which was standard procedure. What was not standard was that the location defaulted to our offices, because my organization's legal department was handling the estate matter as a professional courtesy, and our conference rooms were available. Neither my parents nor their attorney had any reason to look up the address. I was not going to attend the session as a party to the dispute. That was my attorney's role. But I was present in the building the morning they arrived, and I was standing near the elevator bay when the doors opened and I watched them walk out. My father had aged in the way men who were once broad and confident sometimes age. The confidence still carried in the posture, but the physical certainty beneath it diminished. My mother was smaller than I remembered, or perhaps I was simply larger than I had been. She was still wearing the good pearls. They didn't see me. They were looking for the reception desk, looking for directions, looking the way people look in buildings they don't know. Their attorney was a man I didn't recognize, younger than I would have expected, carrying his own leather portfolio. He walked to the front desk and said they were there for a mediation, gave the attorney's name on the case. The receptionist looked at her screen. "And which party are you representing?" He gave my parents' names. The receptionist nodded and picked up the phone to call upstairs. And then she said, as she always says when anyone calls my department, "I'll let Dr. Calloway's office know you're here." I watched their attorney's face change first. He looked down at his portfolio. He opened it. He looked at whatever was written there, and then he looked around the lobby, and his eyes found me standing near the elevator bay in my white coat with my ID badge clearly visible. He closed his portfolio. He looked at my father, then back at me, and then he said, very carefully, "Good morning, Dr. Calloway." My mother turned around. My father turned around. I don't know exactly what I expected from that moment. I had thought about it. I would be lying if I said I hadn't imagined it, in different versions at different points over the years. But the reality of it was quieter than any version I had imagined. My mother's hand went to her pearls. My father's mouth opened and then closed. I nodded once, professionally, the way I nod at anyone in my building. "Good morning," I said, and I walked to the elevator. The mediation lasted less than 90 minutes. My attorney called me afterward and said their attorney had requested an adjournment almost immediately after the session began, once it became clear what exactly he had walked into. The claim was formally withdrawn 10 days later. I wasn't surprised, but I want to be honest about something. The withdrawal of the claim was not the thing that mattered most. The thing that mattered most had already happened in the lobby, in those 10 seconds, in the look on my parents' faces. Not because I wanted them to suffer. I want to be careful here because I have thought about this more than most people think about things that happened to them 16 years ago. I don't think I wanted revenge in the way the word implies. What I had needed, for 16 years without fully knowing it, was for them to see what they had discarded. To understand the weight of what they had handed back to me that February morning with $40 and a shelter phone number. They saw it. That was enough. My aunt's attorney reached out a few weeks later to confirm that the estate had been fully settled in my favor, as my aunt had clearly intended. I made a donation in her name to the community college where I'd taken my first chemistry class. I wrote a letter to the chemistry department explaining who she was and what she had done. They named a small scholarship after her the following year. It goes to a student each fall who is a first-generation college student, returning after a gap in their education, pursuing a science degree. Marcus applied to colleges that spring. He was accepted at the school he wanted. The night we opened the acceptance letter, he held it the same way my aunt had held my medical school acceptance, like something fragile and permanent at the same time. We called it a night early, and I drove to the cemetery, and I sat for a while in the cold next to a stone that has her name and the years she lived and nothing else, because she had said she didn't want anything flowery. I told her about the scholarship. I told her about Marcus. I told her that I understood now, better than I ever had, what she had meant about building the house, that the materials were what she gave me, that the house was what I made, that the two things are separate, and both matter, and you cannot have the second without honoring the first. I drove home in the dark. A few months after the estate was settled, I received a card in the mail from my parents. No letter inside, just a card. One of those generic ones from a pharmacy rack with a landscape on the front and nothing specific about it. My mother had written a few sentences in her small, neat handwriting. She said she hoped I was well. She said she had heard I had a son. She said she thought about me. I read it twice. I put it in a drawer. I have not responded. I may, someday. I am not decided. The person I am at 34 is different from the person I was at 18 standing on those front steps, and she is different again from the person I was at 25 or 30, grinding through a residency with no one to call at midnight except an elderly woman who always picked up on the second ring. I am not angry in the way I once was. Anger at that temperature requires a kind of energy I have redirected elsewhere. But I am also not someone who confuses forgiveness with amnesia, or who believes that a card from a pharmacy rack erases what a February night and a garbage bag and $40 cost me. What I know is this. My aunt once told me I was beginning. She was right. Everything they did was a beginning I did not choose but could not undo. And so I walked through it toward the life on the other side, and the life on the other side is mine. Marcus is the best person I know. My aunt's scholarship will outlast all of us. My name is on an office door in a building in the city where I was born, above a title that means something, and it means something because of the woman who slept on a pull-out sofa and made soup from scratch and said, "What bus are you on? I'll meet you downstairs." I carry her with me every single day, and when I walked past their attorney in that lobby, when he looked at my badge and understood what he had walked into, when he said, "Good morning, Dr. Calloway," in that careful voice, I did not feel victory exactly. What I felt was something steadier than victory, something that does not have an opposite. I felt like myself. That is the only thing they were never able to take, and the only thing that ever really mattered.